person presenting it is Jack Conrad. So I'll hand you over to Jack now to begin his presentation. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne. Yeah, this opening is provoked, inspired, responding to the initiative by the comrades in talking about socialism to draft a program in the context of forging communist unity. So I'm going to be picking up some of the things that the comrades have been saying, and I'm going to, as it says on the can, draw on the lessons of Bolshevism. Why Bolshevism? 1917, successful working class revolution, mass party, inspired the world. That's why. Okay, so let's begin with the positive. We think that it's positive that the comrades are drafting a program. It's good to treat the program question seriously. It's good that in terms of the comrades that they tell us, and I take it in good faith, that they've rejected the transitional program. That's with big, uppercases, but also the so-called transitional method. So they're rejecting Trotsky's program of 1938, where essentially you can see World War II coming, didn't have anything remotely like a mass party anywhere, had a few thousand comrades globally, and was really relying on economics. It was really relying on spontaneity to produce the party, hence his program. And hence also much of the left, not just the Trotskyist or Trotskyoid left today, basically thinks that it's engaging in some very sophisticated politics when it looks at the most minimalist economic demands and blesses them with what is called the transitional method. So you can look at a strike, and the idea is if you pursue it militantly enough, this will seriously end with workers establishing their own fighting units, end with the workers establishing their own Soviets, and it's only one more step before you're storming Parliament and declaring the Socialist Republic. And I'm not kidding. That is where much of today's left is at. So the comrades tell us that they reject that. Now, my fear is, and again, maybe I'm overreading things, but I'm not sure. We haven't seen a final draft. We haven't seen the debate inside talking about socialism. But my fear is that what they'll produce is something at least along the lines of the Socialist Party of Great Britain. This is a maximalist program that rejects all notions of reform, all notions of transition between capitalism with capitalist state power and communism, a mode of production that doesn't only have people working according to their abilities because they love it, but also taking according to their needs. And of course, what the comrades in the SPGB at least say, they recognize the problem. You can't do that in one country. They're quite clear on that. So what they say is something like 6 billion people more or less simultaneously vote or decide that they've become convinced of socialism And on that basis, you can have a global transition, or at least the leading countries can transition to a system with no money, no state, based on the communist principle of production and communist principle of distribution. So when, for example, I've raised with the comrades, well, okay, so in Britain, you win a majority in parliament. What do you do about the army? It's no problem. We've convinced the army already. They're all socialists. What about, I don't know, MI5 and MI6? Oh, that's no problem because we've convinced them of that. Well, what about the monarchy? Oh, we've abolished the monarchy long before that, but you don't stand for reforms, comrade. I mean, this is the sort of discussions I've had with the comrades in the SPGB. Okay, we believe also in coordinating revolution internationally. We believe in synchronizing revolution to the greatest extent that we can. We certainly believe, in a European scale revolution, but we recognize that revolution will be uneven, and we recognize the necessity of preparing the working class, turning it from a class in itself into a class for itself. That's, from our point of view, what reforms and the struggle for reforms are about. But we also recognize, what Marx talked about, a transition period. And I think Marx talked about, a generation, 2 generations maybe, of experiencing civil war, bitter struggles, before you can actually arrive at the fully developed communist mode of production. That's sort of our approach. But as I said, my fear is that the comrades in TAS are more inclined towards the SPGB approach than what I would describe, at least, as the sort of classic Marxist approach. Okay, so I think it's just worth saying, so, in terms of the actual comrades involved, that it's taken them some time, some considerable time. I mean, we're not talking about political virgins. It's taken them some considerable time to come around to the idea that they need to prepare a program. I mean, if you look at the letter or the statement that we carry in the current edition of the Weekly Worker, signed by Comrade Nick Rack and Comrade Ed Potts, they quote their earlier proposals. They quote the earlier proposals that have come from the pro-talks wing faction of Prometheus. And what you've got there isn't a program for a party. What it is a sort of, I don't know, statement of agreement between 3 organizations. This is what we jointly can agree. To me, this isn't what's required. Maybe you can come to such a document, but for a partyist perspective, we need to be thinking about program. We need to be thinking about the program that transforms the working class, as I said, into a class for itself, and talks about a strategy, a realistic strategy to realize the transition from capitalism to communism. From our point of view, you need to begin that work now. If you're talking about party, that work isn't something you put off. In other words, our argument is it's not party that comes first, it's program. It's the program from which the party is built. It's not the program that the party then agrees to. And so, my example of that, the best example, it's not the only, as you will see, it's not the only example, but it's the best because it was failed, but it was the most successful thus far. And that's the Bolsheviks. Okay, So we're not just talking here, though, about the Bolsheviks. We're talking about the RSDLP, and we're talking about before the RSDLP was successfully established at the 1903 Congress that began in Brussels and ended in London. So our approach to this history isn't, of course, to copy. We're not Russians. We don't live in the Russian Empire. We don't live at the end of the 19th century. We know all of that. So yes, we're talking about emulating. We're talking about learning. We're not talking about copying. We're not talking about any idea that we live in exactly the same sort of historic period, except in the broadest possible extent. And it's also worth pointing out, and I think this is an important question, that when the comrades in Russia began talking about programs, certainly when Lenin begins talking about a program, this is Lenin in prison, Lenin in exile in Siberia. This is before the Iskra paper is launched. This is before, of course, the Brussels/London Congress. He's openly saying that what we need to do is base our program on the Erfurt program, the program of German social democracy. This is the best that's available to us. We don't care if people say that, we're just following in the footsteps of the Germans. We're proud of that. And the reason I bring this up is, one, because it's true. I mean, Lars T. Lee, in his great book, talks about the Bolsheviks in particular being Russian. It's not a great phrase, is it? Russian Erfurtians. Not an easy phrase, at least off my lips. But there's a truth to that, and he openly declares it in his first writings on the question of program. And one of the reasons I bring it up as well is, of course, that we've got a letter, is it, a contribution on the TAS site from Comrade Peter Kennedy that we're going to run. He's edited it up into an article for the forthcoming Weekly Worker, 1542, issue 1542. And this is a critique or a reply to Mike McNair's, I think, part one of his three-parter of where he takes issue with Peter Kennedy. And this is I'm not going to deal with every point. I just want to deal with one point that Comrade Peter asserts, and that is the Erfurt program contained the seeds of opportunism. It contained the seeds of 1914. If we want to look at social democracy in Europe and beyond, and to find out what the problem is, look at Erfurt. I absolutely disagree with that. Worthwhile pointing out, though, that I was looking at, I think, my volume 6 of Lenin's collected works the other night, and just looking up, Lenin's first writings on the program. And it says, this is the Moscow edition, it too says, if you want to find the seeds of opportunism in the Second International, look to the Erfurt program. So here we have a self-declared Trotskyist comrade, I think Peter would say that, and Moscow, 1977, they say exactly the same thing. Well, Lenin never said that. And in my view, what you have, I would sum it up with Lenin's pamphlet, The Renegade Kautsky. And if we look at what Lenin was writing in 1914, one, he was taken aback at the stance of the German Reichstag faction unanimously, right? No dissenting voice in the first vote, unanimously voting for the war credits. And what did he call these people? He called them traitors. What did he call Kautsky, who has adopted this centrist position? of urging the faction in the Reichstag, abstain, vote against. But what Kautsky did and what the center did is maintain its unity with the right. Lenin and the Bolsheviks denounced Kautsky as a renegade. They'd sold out. You've sold out the program. And my argument would be that if you take the Erfurt program, this is something that was realized in 1917 by the Bolshevik Revolution. It was sold out by German social democracy, by the right wing and the centrists of German social democracy in 1914. And it's worthwhile looking back at Lenin's writings of 1914. He's both despairing at the treachery, but he also says, I am absolutely confident that the German working class will recover. Because if you look below the level of the top leaders, these comrades have been educated in Marxism. They'll soon recover their bearings, having been betrayed by their leaders. And if we look at 1916, 1917, 1918, that is certainly the case. We have the German Independent Social Democratic Party, we have the Spartakusbund, we end up with the Mass Communist Party in Germany. I'm not going to go into their failures or anything like that, but they recovered. That's really my point here. Social democracy was based on something like the Erfurt program. Worthwhile pointing out as well that when Lenin got round to the question of program, they all knew about Engels's critique of the Erfurt program. A lot of people think that meant he rejected the Erfurt program. No, nothing of the sort. Engels greeted the Erfurt program as a triumph of the ideas of Marxism. That's what he says. He saw it as a vindication, right? Because he saw the German social democracy discarding the illusions of Lassalleanism that had marred the Gotha program. He had a big criticism of the Erfurt program. It didn't raise the question of the Democratic Republic. That was his big criticism, because the Germans were looking, how do we stay within the law? They'd been declared illegal. They were, previously smuggling their paper in. And Engels understood that and was saying, well, we must come across some, but no, the main point I'm trying to stress here is that Engels celebrated the victory of the Erfurt program. And if you want to read, the best account of how the Erfurt program came into existence, read the appendix of the translation of Kautsky's Republicanism by Ben Lewis. And what Ben has done has got together the contributions of Engels, of Kautsky, of Bebel, of Liebknecht, and how they fashion and debate this program. But what comes out is a model. And this is something that Lenin and the Russian Social Democrats lay hold of and say, we'll have that. We're not going to copy it. That would be ridiculous. We don't live in the German Empire. We've still got masses of peasants, and not just 20, 30, 40, 50 or 60% peasants. We've got something more along the lines of 90% of peasants. Either way, they lay hold of the Erfurt program. And that's why I think Lars is quite right talking about the Bolsheviks being Russian Erfurtians. Okay, let's look at the question of Russian social democracy. We all know how it begins. It begins with former Narodniks, people who were allies of Marx. Remember, the first translation, I think, of Capital into Russian was done by a Narodnik. If we look at Marx, as a leading member of the First International, he represented Russia at meetings down the road in Greek Street, for example. Why? Because the Russian Narodniks trusted him, because he viewed the Russian Narodniks as allies against Bakunin and the anarchists. But he looked at Russia and basically said, well, there's no proletariat, there's a massive peasantry. He toyed with the idea, let's not put it too strongly, but he toyed with the idea of Russia actually bypassing capitalism. We all know about the draft not sent of his letter to Vera Zaluzevich. Anyway, my point is that if we look at these Russian social democrats, it's around Plekhanov. There's a small group of them. They base themselves in exile in Switzerland, and they start writing Marxist polemics against the Narodniks. And if we look at one particular pamphlet or work, this is by Axelrod, Pavel Axelrod. He writes this pamphlet called The Present Tasks and Tactics of Russian Social Democracy, and he includes a draft program as an appendix of this. And if we look at Lenin, we all know his history. He begins as someone, like a lot of social democrats, giving out leaflets outside factories. We know the history of these circles. They get arrested, they get sent to prison, they get sent to exile. That's their university. And what Lenin is doing in his university, he's thinking through organization, but he's also thinking through program. And if we look at Lenin when he starts to write about his plan for an illegal paper, about establishing an illegal organization in Russia, he's also talking in parallel about a program. So he writes in 1899 something called a draft program for our party. This is a party, remember, that's had its first Congress in Minsk, but all the delegates have been arrested. Worth noting also, though, that although that first Congress of the RSDLP published a manifesto, it also committed the comrades to drafting a program, right? They recognize the difference between a manifesto and a strategy for achieving socialism. So where are we? I've already mentioned Erfurt, the Erfurt program. Lenin talks about imitating, borrowing, but not copying. We know when the Iskra group comes together, this is the result of basically the merger of Lenin's group, that St. Petersburg League of Struggle, and the Plekhanov group in Switzerland. That if we look at the editorial board of Iskra, it's a sort of marrying of these two organizations. There's two youngsters, that's Lenin and Martov, and then there's the old generation of comrades, crucially Plekhanov. So Lenin, I think tactically well advised, maybe not, who knows, suggests that the old man himself drafts the theoretical side of the program. The five of them, the five editors of Iskra, have agreed the minimum section. So they've been talking about the peasant question, working hours. They've been talking about political liberty. They've been talking about the necessity of elections. They are working, it needs to be stressed, on what is often dismissively called a two-stage program. That is the overthrow of Tsarism, political liberty, and then the working class can start putting itself forward with the growth of capitalism as a potential ruling class. That's what they're all working from until we get to 1905. Either way, when Plekhanov produces his draft, and I've only looked at Lenin's notes, so you've got the particular passage that Lenin is sort of highlighting and going, oh, I don't really like that. There are 30 notes by this comrade called Fay. That's Lenin. And I quite frankly, reading the stuff that Lenin is criticizing, I have to go, well, that's why I was questioning the advisability. You can see in terms of the five why Lenin would have said, look, I think Mr. Superior, Mr. Father of us all, you should write it. But my God, he did come up with a turkey, because Plekhanov is describing a Russia of where, seriously, I mean, I don't know where it's come from. The majority of the population are proletarians. He's describing, I mean, I'm not joking. He's describing a situation of where the capitalist class, and he's talking not about petty capital, he's talking about the capitalist class, dominate and control the means of production. And Lenin puts down, it's not really true, is it? There is the 90% of the population. Okay, there are landless peasants, but land, plows, scythes, and there's also loads of artisan production. He also questions Plekhanov on direct elections. Plekhanov seems to be proposing some sort of plebiscitary democracy. And Lenin says, well, even the Germans have rejected that. Maybe in the distant future, he says, but not now. This would be ridiculous. Anyway, Lenin comes out with 30 objections. Has to be said, my impression, very impression, I've never read a biography of Plekhanov, but everything I've read tends to indicate he was a very, well, knowledgeable, but also very aristocratic Marxist. He didn't take kindly to criticism. And when Martov and Lenin were criticizing, and quite roundly criticizing, his theoretical section of the program, he didn't take kindly to it. He did go off and rewrite some of it. It came back, it was amended. And this is the point I'm trying to get to. But I did think the process was important. This is the program that the Iskra group, and I use the word advisedly, because what's happened is it's gone from 5 or 6 editors to some sort of national organization, still not deeply rooted in the working class, but in Petrograd, or no, I should say St. Petersburg, Moscow, Kiev, maybe Minsk, Yaroslavl, Siberia. There are Iskra groups, and Iskra goes into this Brussels, London Congress. It's the main organizer, and it's Lenin that's the main organizer of all this. He is not only an energetic writer, he's someone who's developed contacts with what he calls the practicals in Russia. These are agents that are appointed from above, not elected by the committees below. They're appointed, but it's him, his wife, his sister, and his brother that act as a sort of secretariat for Iskra. So Lenin actually, this explains the Second Congress. Lenin has developed a personal relationship with what he calls the practicals in Russia, and they look to Lenin for political leadership. They've read his Where to Begin, What is to be Done, but they've also been in correspondence with what they would have viewed as the effective leader of the Iskra group that's taken the lead in convening this Congress abroad and organizing this Congress. Anyway, we all know, well, we should know all about the Second Congress, and I'm not going to go through it. The long and the short of it is that the Iskra comrades have an overwhelming majority. There's the Bund there, though, and that is rooted in the Jewish working class, not just a group, but something more, profound than that. Although the Jews are a small population in the Russian Empire, what we have is the proletariat. They represent in many ways the first generation of proletarians in the Russian Empire. So in Poland, in Kingdom Poland, but also in other parts of Russia, Jews are the first generation of proletarians. And they are organized both in terms of Iskra, but also the Bund, the Jewish League, Jewish Workers' League. And of course, the Bund demand of the Congress exclusive representation of Jews. Well, I can tell you that Leon Trotsky and Jules Martov didn't take kindly to that. They were Iskra comrades, and that was rejected by the Congress. And as a result of that, the Bund walk. We also have the economists, at least this is what Lenin would have called them, and what the Iskra comrades would have called them. People who say that trade unionism, economic demand should come first. The liberal bourgeoisie should take the lead in what the Iskarists called the bourgeois revolution, the overthrow of Tsarism. This is the job of the liberal bourgeoisie or the revolutionary bourgeoisie, as happened in 1789 in France. That's what they were thinking was going to happen in Russia. Okay, but what happens with the program? The delegates vote for it, and you can read the speeches of the economists, and basically they're going, look, we know that Iskra is going to win this vote. We're going to stay in the Congress, but we know that Iskra is going to win every vote, and they're basically saying that Iskra is using domineering tactics, and it has to be said that in terms of the vote on the program, it's voted through. They have a debate on it. They have amendments. A couple of amendments are passed, not to the liking of Lenin, not to the liking of Plekhanov. I'm not sure exactly who voted the wrong way, but enough delegates did. So we're not talking about something that's an automatic block. One of the first acts of the Congress is to dissolve group discipline. And so the Iskaris are meeting, but in a non-binding way. They're having discussions, but they can't, how should I put it, mandate anyone. So there's no binding discipline. So the votes that are happening often have shifting pattern. And Lenin, in his one step forward, two steps back, analyzes in considerable detail the faction alignments, because of course what happens with the rules as opposed to the actual program, this is the split between Martov and Lenin. And it's Plekhanov that takes Lenin's side, and it's Lenin that begins as a minority after that vote, because what we have is still the Bund in the Congress. We still have the economists in the Congress. When the Bund leave, Lenin is in a majority, and Lenin has the practicals on his side as well as Plekhanov. And if you read the early part of the Congress, Lenin is pleading for minority rights. And in one step forward, two steps back, he says, well, yeah, of course I was pleading for minority rights. I was in a minority. I mean, wouldn't you? I would. But when he was in a majority, what did he do? He pushed through a vote, not in an oppressive way, but when it came, for example, to the editorial board, he said, well, Martov should be on the editorial board. But this will be an editorial board of 3 to begin with, not the 6 that they began with. And what you saw, Martov, right, said, I'm not going to stand for election. And what you had is a split, as I said, in the Iskra organization. And this is the birth of this majorityists, the Bolsheviks, who began as a minority, became the majority, and the minority, the Mensheviks. And the Mensheviks side with the Bund post facto, side with the economists, want to come to a rotten accommodation. And Lenin says, no, we shouldn't go for rotten accommodation. We shouldn't go for unity mongering. I'm quite prepared to have the Bund in, but they have got to obey the rules of the party. They've got to abide by the resolutions of the party. They can have a faction, they can argue against it, but that's how Congresses should work. And Martov, who agreed to be bound by the Congress, should have been bound by the Congress votes. Now, the reason I've gone into all the ins and outs of Bolshevism and Menshevism is really to sort of look at least what I understand by our approach to current communist unity. Now, we're living in a very different world. We're not just talking about Britain compared with Russia or Russia compared with Germany. I can still, I suppose the best way to illustrate what I'm talking about, I can't remember the name of the film director, but there's at least a film that I enjoyed very much, made by a German film director called Rosa Luxemburg. And it begins at the Social Democratic Ball, I presume, in Berlin. I'm just guessing. And there's Rosa sitting around a table, and someone called Edward. comes up and said, Rosa, would you fancy a dance? And she turns around and says, I am not going to dance with you. I polemicize with you in the daytime. I am not going to dance with you at nighttime. This is Edward Bernstein, of course. But the point I'm making really isn't about Rosa not wanting to dance with Edward, but more the point that Rosa Karl-Kautsky, the German social democracy in 1900, thought that global socialism was one step away, just one step. It wouldn't take much. Capitalism will either collapse or we become so strong. Remember that German social democracy becomes the biggest parliamentary fraction. You know, industrialization on a global scale means the working class is the class of the future. We're going to win. I mean, that was the confidence of the socialist movement. Looking at it from the vantage point, the sorry point of 2025, we can't have the same confidence. So we're living in a very different world. Nonetheless, the point I'm really getting to is that our approach to communist unity is very much the sort of approach that we saw, not just with the Bolsheviks, but Russian social democrats going back to Axelrod and Plekhanov, even before the first Congress, the abortive first Congress of the RSDLP. They're already talking about the necessity of program, they're drafting programs, they're criticizing draft programs. In other words, they're coming to that Congress with a deep history and understanding of their program and the importance of program. And so looking at the comrades in Prometheus, we don't have any such history. You know, indeed, we know from comrades that have defected from us that we had votes for the political economy of the bourgeoisie as opposed to the political economy of the working class. We had resignation over the principle, absolutely fundamental principle from our point of view, of freedom of speech, freedom of polemic. What do we have with comrades in TAS? A mixture, a ragbag mixture, I think still of comrades, I'm guessing, that are committed to the transitional method, such as Peter Kennedy. I know, you know, in terms of his previous writings, he talks about the transitional method when it comes to education. I mean, God help me. And maybe others are committed. So what they come up with as an organization, I don't know. I'm just guessing. Maybe it will be transitional. Maybe it will be a fudge. Maybe it will be a min-max. I don't know. But my fear is, from what I've read, at least the leading comrades in TAS, i.e. Comrade Potts and Comrades Rack, it will be maximalist. They don't understand the importance of the struggle for democracy and the importance of the minimum program. I would love to be proved to be wrong. Okay. Let's just have a look at our own history in that particular respect. Now, we began in terms of our public existence with the Leninist #1, November 1981. That's when we first published. And if you take the Leninist, it began as a quarterly, a journal. And some of my earliest articles were on the question of program. And we approached the question of program under the title, I think, of Which Road? And I was writing a critique of the British Road to Socialism, the program of official communism, Stalin's program, the sort of program that you had in Italy, France, America, but this is the British version of it. This goes back before World War II, but it's Stalin that urges Harry Pollitt to bring it out and bring it on in 1950, and we have the first draft of the British Road to Socialism then. And we've had a whole number of different editions of the British Road to Socialism, or as it's called now, by the Morning Stars party, Britain's road to socialism. We also criticised, and I'm not talking about, oh, that's rubbish. We looked at it, you know, paragraph by paragraph, line by line, section by section. Manifesto for New Times. So this is the Euro-communist replacement for the British road. So this was rejecting class politics. This was sort of, I don't know, the precursor to Blairism. But we also critiqued, again, in a detailed fashion, Peter Taft's Militant What We Stand For, a programmatic document that went through a whole series of different editions, a version, a slightly more left version, a slightly more Labourite version of the British road to socialism. But we also started to move towards the position of saying, this is the sort of architecture that we think that our programme will need. And so we published our critique of what I'd call the opportunist programs of the Euros, the official communists, militant. We published it in the book Which Road, and we included a section at the back of Which Road, a sort of sketch of a program. We worked on the question of program. We had collective meetings, studies of particular sections, various drafts, redrafts, amendments, and eventually we produced our first draft program, 1995. And we've amended it in minor ways twice, 2011 and 2023. Some of those changes are cosmetic, some of them are more important. The main point is, though, that we've got a very deep back history of program. And the point I'm trying to get to is that our program isn't just based on a critique of the BRS and militant what we stand for, the Euros. It's based precisely on, look, let's look at the Russians, let's look at the Germans, let's look at the French, let's look at the best that's available to us in terms of history. So this proposal that we junk that program and go for some lowest common denominator when it comes to our fusion process is just not on as far as we're concerned. Indeed, I mean, this draft program constitutes a whole. So, well, we've got draft rules. You could exclude them and publish them separately. That's no problem. But the introduction matters to this draft program, because what it says there is this is the document that we will present to a refoundation Congress of a Communist Party. This is our contribution to it. So in the same way that the Iskra group, you know, their draft program is their contribution of years of work going back before Iskra was even a gleam in Lenin's eye, right back to Plekhanov and Axelrod, right back to the Erfurt program, Engels's critique. That's what we're bringing to it. So no, we're not going to just cast it aside and get together with two other comrades and say, well, what can we agree? That's not our approach. What we're proposing, of course, if you come to the table with your draft, we'll certainly look at it. If you come to the table and say, look, we don't like this section, we'll debate it. If you come to the table and you defeat us in terms of proposing some amendment, either we shrug our shoulders and go, well, that's all right, we can live with that. If it's a question of principle, if it's a question of major strategy, as I would argue, if I'm right about let's not really have a transition period, that we can ignore the middle classes. We can have, in terms of, this is a recent quote, not an old quote, we can come to power in a country like Britain, and so wonderful will things be, quote unquote, that other comrades abroad will seek to emulate what we've done. I mean, I'm being serious. We talk about, if you come to power in a country like Britain and it remains isolated for any length of time, we'll be starving. I don't know what the percentage of food that we import is, other than it's high. I know all about World War One because my mum lived through it and would tell me about it. But they dug up everything in Britain, and they still relied on ships coming in and surviving, submarine warfare. They still relied on supplies from abroad. In other words, even though they dug up everything that you could dig up. And what applies to food applies to industry. I was making a point to a comrade earlier that I don't know what it was like in the 1960s. I'm just guessing. But, from my knowledge, if you take Vauxhall, General Motors in Luton and Dunstable, I've been taken for a walk around that particular factory, and I think that's when it employed about 30,000 workers, if I'm not mistaken. I think they made more or less everything there. I'm not sure about the tires and the glass, speedometer or anything like that. But basically, they put the car together, having made it there. That ain't the case any longer. That if we look, for example, I think it's BMW in Oxford. My guess is, I mean, I don't know, but my guess is that the engines that are put in the cars in the Oxford plant are now made in Germany. So here we are we followed the TAS program. We're in a minority going, oh my God, you're really leading us to disaster. We really should be waiting for the Germans, the French, the Italians, the Spanish to catch up with us in the vanguard role. Imagine Britain in the vanguard role. Hard to do, but let's just do it. And okay, we come to power and we go straight for the transition. Do the German capitalists keep sending those engines to Oxford? I don't think so. I mean, especially when we've abolished money. So what do we do about these cars that we're producing in Oxford? And my joke is, half joke, is we have Tasmobiles. And Tasmobiles are, existing BMW cars, but they've got no engines in them. And so we put horses in front of them. And in terms of delivering people to work and driving to their homes after work, they go by Tasmobile. I know in London, the traffic goes at about the same pace as a horse in Victorian times, but that's the sort of socialism that we'll be talking about. And of course, it's a joke. The reality is that what we would be in a situation of, not only would you have the middle classes rebelling and joining a counter-revolution, the idea that the workers would find that inspiring abroad, this is just ridiculous. And what I would say, again, this is another plug for my comrade Ben Lewis, one of his other services to Marxism, is to translate Zinoviev's great speech, the speech of the 20th century, it was called by the German press in 1920, head to head in Halle. This is the unity, this is the Congress of the United Social Democratic Party, whether it affiliates to the Third International. Majority voted yes. But you have this speech by Zinoviev, the leader of the Communist International. And what's notable about that speech is his honesty about the poverty and the chaos in Russia. And Zinoviev is acutely aware that that's the main argument used by the right wing of that Congress and by centrists in Europe that are saying we don't want to copy the example of Russia because that means poverty, that means defeat. And Zinoviev's answer to it is, well, yeah, we're in poverty. And the only chance we've got is you making your revolution. That would be the situation that we would be in. We wouldn't be a shining example, except to say we've overthrown the bourgeoisie. We've got, we've got our extreme democracy. And we'll keep that extreme democracy as long as we can, comrades. Come to our rescue as quickly as possible. That's the truth. And we ought to be saying that. And that's why we are talking about coordinated revolution having a strategy of Europe, And it's why we're saying slowly, voluntarily, when it comes to the petty bourgeoisie and those such as lawyers, architects, doctors. I'm talking about surgeons, people who have middle class skill monopolies. We don't want to drive them away. We want to keep them. And therefore, yeah, I think it's in the words of Nye Bevin, isn't it? When it comes to the national, we're going to stuff their mouths with gold if necessary. That's what we will do. That's a retreat. We recognize it. Retreat as well as advance, but sometimes retreat. Yes. Now we're told, and this is, I'm quoting here, by the way, I'm not just ad-libbing, that our program limits us to what we call extreme democracy. This is reading Mike's third article in his 3-part series. This is just nonsense, comrades. And this comes from a leading comrade in Taz. No, if you look at our program, clearly it said, right, the main question when it comes to quality, seizing power, that is certainly true, overthrowing the bourgeois state, dispersing their army, their police force, their bureaucracy, their spy force. Yes, that's certainly true. But then we're talking about slowly. Yes, that's true. But what's the journey? It's towards world communism. And that isn't just a question of distribution. It's about changing human beings. This is about individual freedom. That's our goal. And anyone who says that we're just aiming for the dictatorship of the proletariat, to use a word I will use, or extreme democracy, where the capitalist state has been over. That's not the end of our journey. That's the decisive point of departure of our journey towards our aim, of course, which begins before the overthrow by organizing a state within a state, a mass party that uses every avenue to educate and prepare the working class, but also to develop international links and international coordination. That's an honest assessment of our program, not the idea that the CPGB wants to stop at some sort of beginning point. No. And we're also told that Mike McNair is a miserabilist. They're my words, by the way, not our comrades. But he's criticized for saying perhaps, I mean, I've already contrasted 1900, right, with 2025, because he raises the danger, and I would say the distinct danger of generalized or even partial nuclear exchange between the great powers. We're talking about Russia, we're talking about China, we're talking about the United States, Britain, France as being minor actors. Britain is just an offshoot of the United States. But fundamentally, we're talking about America and China and Russia being China's Austro-Hungary. That's what we're to raise the question. We're accused of what? That won't inspire the workers. Well, it's not meant to inspire them. This is not meant to be something, oh, we bring on World War III. We are not Possardists. We don't think that socialism will emerge from the ashes. We're warning about the danger of World War III because it will be worse than World War II, will be worse than World War I. Remember, and comrades here will know the text I'm talking about, Communist Manifesto, 1882 preface, the last one written jointly by Marx and Engels. They look to the future and they go, yeah, Russian Revolution, that's bound to happen. But they also warn of the danger of what I will call World War I. They talk about a European war, how this will set us back 20 years and there will be a mountain of skulls. Yeah, royal households, they say, will fall. But our project will be thrown back. Is that miserabilism? That wasn't there to inspire the workers. It was there to warn them. It was telling the truth to the workers. It's not just a question to sit on your bottom and wait for everything nice to happen, right? In the same way, Mike talked about ecological breakdown. Is this miserabilism? Or is it really? We've quoted over a number of articles actuaries not experts in climate, but people who are calculating insurance. And they're basically saying, when it comes to Australia, we can't insure things in terms of the, I'd call it the longer term. We can't insure things, coming up to what civilizational collapse they calculate sometime between 2070 and 2090. That's people in the insurance business, not Marxists, not climate experts. And yet Mike McNair is accused of putting forward a miserablist position. Now, I've already quoted Rosa Luxemburg, at the ball in Berlin. She's the one that's famous, right, for coining, well, not coining, I correct myself. She made famous this phrase, socialism or barbarism, right? So she did put forward that's what Mike McNair was doing. He was putting forward the prospect of either we have barbarism, and given where the world's working class is at the moment, we're not going to lie about the danger of world war or the danger of ecological collapse and civilizational collapse. It's that or the working class comes to power, and the working class has to come to power on a continental basis before rapidly moving towards a global basis. Socialism, right, or barbarism. I think the phrase was actually coined by Engels. That is not miserablism. And we don't just feed workers sugar. We don't just say to them, vote for us and everything will be fine. This isn't realistic. And what we're trying to do is introduce a sense of urgency and responsibility onto the left, that our disunity and our lack of program and our lack of party culture could precisely lead to barbarism. If we don't get our act together, if this generation, I mean, not just including myself, I'm getting towards being the old man, like Plekhanov, our time is coming to an end. But those, amongst the younger comrades who might be alive, by 2070, I don't know about 2090, but might be alive by then, that's what you're facing. And so it's your duty in your own interests to embrace partyism and start to take unity seriously, and not to play, I think, irresponsible games, I'm saying, about accusing the CPGB of things that it's clearly not guilty of. Attack the CPGB, on serious questions of where we disagree, but don't create Aunt Sally's, don't create artificial differences when they don't exist, or differences that maybe hide something. Maybe that's what's going on. Either way, we welcome coming back to the discussions with the comrades in the pro-talks wing of Prometheus and TAS on July the 6th. I think that's where we have it. And we'll see what sort of draft program they produce. As I said, I think it's good that they're talking about program now. But as I said, I think that really to expect us just to junk, how many years would that be? Something like 45 years of work on our draft program, let alone the history that goes behind it, that goes back to the previous century. We're not talking about the 20th century, but back to the 19th. No, we're not going to do that. That isn't an ultimatum. It's simply a question of saying, no, we're going to bring this to the table. But we do think that our draft program is a genuine contribution to the sort of party that we need. This isn't premature. You don't wait for the party and then have the program. Program really is the cart, really is the horse that leads the cart. And I'm not talking about a Tasmobile here. That's it. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you very much, Jack. Apologies to comrades. We had a visitor who put up some racist rubbish, and I've removed him and him. I'm presuming it's a him, but it could be a them, could be a she too. So anyway, that's gone. So okay, so I'm asking for contributions on the subject matter of program. Just my own view, having listened to Jack and read what's been said in the papers and some of it previously, is like it seems like a huge waste of time to go and try to create something which isn't the same as the CPGB's program because of the fact that we've spent so many years studying it. Its work in and of itself is both worthwhile taking seriously and also worthwhile critiquing. So if you're going to critique it from a point of view of changing it or writing something new, it would seem to be the most valuable use of time. It's also, in my experience, much easier way to work out what you think by relating to an already existing document. So that would be my view. Otherwise, I think it's extremely difficult to do it, especially in a number of weeks. So, um, so I hang on a second. I just better check and see if I'm looking at the right list to see whether I'm not in the webinar. Hang on a second, sorry.
Jim Nelson.
Sorry, thank you very much, Yasmina. Yes, Jim Nelson.
I don't really like coming in this quick, but since nobody else is, and the thing is, it's a matter of trust, isn't it? You've got all these groups. I mean, I was in a group years ago. You trust your comrades, sort of thing. You're in that sort of family atmosphere almost. And then what? You trust the other people. Well, you have to at some stage, don't you? Unless we're going to just have 100 varieties or whatever of left-wing groups who can all go out on a demonstration, fill the streets of London or elsewhere, chant things, and then go home. I mean, I was in demonstrations in the 60s and 70s, Vietnam and Ireland and South Africa and all the rest of it. And it was when you go on a demonstration and then you have a natter with your mates in the pub afterwards, and you meet some of the people from the other groups afterwards as well. I mean, I joined the Workers' Revolutionary Party because I think I need to do something serious. This is going nowhere. Of course, it's continue to go nowhere, but there you go. We have all these groups. We have agreement on all sorts of things, like Gaza, obviously, and agreement on Trump and all sorts of stuff. But we have to actually organize to do something, to accomplish something. And yes, to have the idea of dumping 45 years worth of work, they're going to produce a program in what, 5 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever it is. That won't be going to their membership, will it, for discussion, group meetings, and so on, amendments, votes, and so on and so on. It'd be something for us to discuss, and obviously we'll take it seriously. It's good that even this tiny step is good. But yes, it is urgent, so urgent. And everybody has to take a certain sort of forward step and not think, oh, if I step off the pavement, I'm going to get run over straight away. No, we've got to work these things out. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Jim. I think you make a good point there about the different programs that compete with each other on the left, and about this response perhaps of TAS being a reflection of this kind of approach, that everybody has to have their own, and that the notion of collaboration is not something that, you know, you should orientate towards. Okay, so I'm going to take Mike McNair and then Ant.
Okay, task comrades are arguing that we aren't acting collaboratively, and the reason why we aren't acting collaboratively is because we haven't been willing to say we will sit down in the committee and produce a draft program by agreement between them and us. Yeah. And we haven't been willing to say that because we've said we're not going to say we don't say that our draft program is an ultimatum, but we do say that it has to remain on the table. That this is we are at the end of the day, any actual agreement among groups is going to have to be founded on the basis that there's majority at the end of the day, there's majority vote, and there's agreement to accept a common position, which is voted by a majority. Because otherwise, actually, you can't. It's all very well saying we can do agreement, and yeah, hypothetical. It may well be that it's not the case that that we can agree on everything, even in a small group. But in a small group, it's relatively easy to agree on everything. But if you're trying to build a serious and substantial organisation of hundreds and thousands and so on and so forth, if everybody isn't going to agree on everything, it's going to be a question of what you vote on and what you accept as positions which have been voted on. And it's for that reason, actually, that I'm actually welcoming. I welcome the comrades from TASC going ahead and drafting their own draft program, because we've had a series of discussions online and face-to-face in which we've had criticisms of the CPGB's draft program, but at the same time, lack of clarity about what would be. And it's not just criticisms of the CPGB draft program of a sort which you could say, well, we could amend it, but it's criticisms that the structure is wrong, that the concept is wrong. And therefore, that's why it should be, the proposal is that it's uncollaborative to not agree. But in that case, actually, to collaborate would be not to collaborate, but to capitulate, as Jack has said in the latest article in the paper. And I think that's it is that at the end of the day is the fundamental question. We have to see what the comrades, that's why it's a step forward for the comrades to draft their own program, and not because it's capable of taking us beyond discussions which have just been in the nature of here's this which is wrong with the CPGB's draft program. Okay, what alternative? That's it.
Okay, Ant, and then Moshe, and then Rafael.
Okay, am I there?
Yes.
Okay. From my limited experience of TAS, I know that there are certain comrades that I've known for quite a while, actually, for years and years and years. But I didn't know very much about TAS. Just 1 second, please. 1 second. Sorry. Okay. My thought that okay, you've got your program, and but I think you've accepted that you are not the party. As far as I know, you are in favour of it. Correct me if I'm wrong. Obviously, you're in favour of a revolutionary party, but you are not the actual party. So it's not simply a case of that. It's the expansion of the CPGB. It's the creation of another revolutionary party. Okay, I would say myself that regardless of the details of your program, whether they are positive or negative, I think that there's an essential skeleton, and without fulfilling the conditions of an essential skeleton, I don't think that anything's going to happen. I think that we can all agree, more or less, that the working class needs an international revolutionary organisation. I think we're all on board. But But then I think the problem then comes to, what do you mean by, these phrases that you throw out with regularity, extreme democracy and democratic republic and the like, because as I understand it, and I'm pretty sure there are comrades within TAS who think on a similar basis. The Revolutionary Party, the Revolution Organization, is not a government in waiting. It advocates the power of the working class through its own self-created bodies, arising through the class struggle, coordinating through mandating recallable delegates to a central organ. And apart from this specifically proletarian delegatory democracy, there is no way to introduce socialism. And at best, the pre-existing structures under capitalism, at best, can only provide an arena to make propaganda for revolution, not to make revolution. So I find it very, very difficult to see how organizations not agreeing on, those very concise, simple points could merge. Until you got such a foundation, then I can't really see the point in arguing about a long, detailed program, providing a long analysis of capitalism, past, present, future, blueprints for its revolution, abolition. I think that if you can't get over the first hurdle, you can't get over the rest. And I as I understand it, you reject the idea of the power of the self-created bodies, the councils, the Soviets, and any other body which may arise in the future. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, and Moshe, please.
Yes, thank you. I'm feeling very worried about the realistic prospects of the fusion and what it's going to lead with. The problem is what to do with the provisional program. The provisional program is, in a sense, too good. It is a formidable document, and as we know, it has taken years to hone down and to amend and to expect the CPGB comrades, of whom I'm a good friend, to give it up is simply a non-starter. It's not going to happen, and it shouldn't happen. On the other hand, to expect the task comrades and others to simply accept it as the program of the fused organization, I think is not going to happen, because this would mean that they're simply joining the CPGB. It's not going to be a fusion, but a growth of the CPGB by accretion. And I think that the prospects of this are not very brilliant. That's regrettable. But so, what is the way out? I'm at a loss. I think the provisional program could serve as a program of a faction within the fused organization. That would mean that the fused organization, which, as I think Jack has argued quite convincingly, you can't form an organization without some founding program. You need the founding program. So you need a program that may be much shorter for the fused organization. Of course, it would have to fulfill certain minimal conditions. For example, if it denies the need for a transitional period between capitalism and communism, then it is not acceptable as a starter. for reasons that Jack has gone into, and for the additional reason that I raised in a previous meeting, that is that the transition from market economy to a planned economy is something that we would need quite an extended process. It's not going to happen in a couple of years. If you begin to think about what would be needed. So what I would envisage as a way out is an elaboration of a program for the fused organization, which would be consistent with the provisional program, but not coextensive with it. Something much briefer, not as brief as the Marx-inspired program of the Parti Ouvrier of France in the 1880s, but something much briefer, much less elaborate than the provisional program that all the fused, or the majority of the fused constituents could agree on, and leaving the provisional program as a program of a faction within the fused organization. This is not an ideal situation, but I can't see any other alternative that could even work. Thank you.
Thank you, Moshe. Just before Raphael comes in, I wanted just to ask the question about the role of democracy, whether the task comrades appreciate or really understand what the CPGB is getting at on that question, because it seems to me that that's the major issue in it, the transition from capitalism to socialism even necessitating, extreme democracy, which I know Ant has an issue with. That is something that I think that maybe it's not just a question of rivalry between organizations, but actually not really understanding, not really getting that issue in the way that you would hope they would. Anyway, Raphael.
Hello. So I wanted to ask. First of all, I'd like to just say that I certainly agree that it's a good thing that any program agreed on for a new Communist Party should be voted on and agreed on a sort of line by line, amendment by amendment basis at a fusion or refoundation Congress, rather than agreed in sort of between the leaderships of the organizations in a smoky back room ahead of time. But I wanted to ask about something that, since Jack mentioned that on the question of votes at a refoundation Congress, that there are, of course, parts of the draft program that are fundamental, that are questions of principle or tactics, such as the question of a transition period, that are fundamental. So the CPGB would walk if those were not voted through. But I was wondering if he would answer or give some indication of, what are some sections or points in the draft program that aren't fundamental. What sections does he consider least important, that in the event of a refoundation Congress, if they were not voted through, those those points you could take or leave? Obviously, I understand if you would prefer to hold your cards close to your chest on a matter like that, but I'm just interested, in your opinion, which sections are the most I don't know if precise is the right word, but the least important, the least fundamental. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael. Stan?
Yeah, I wanted to respond to Moshe, really. I mean, the thing is, Moshe, that it's well overdue that communists organise themselves together in a communist party or a provisional communist party, and organising ourselves is our first duty. Then we can deal with the world, but individually we can't. We've got quite a few individuals who are pretty good, but not willing to be organised. It's very strange to me. If the process of organising together means that we overlook, if you like, we not overlook, but we don't make our different opinions into a block against being organised. So, of course, the situation of the CPGB is, as it was in the Leninist organisation before that, is a situation where different tendencies can coexist and argue out their differences. And we do argue out our differences, don't we? And it's okay when comrades disagree. They don't have to split, because our culture is that we organise and we debate differences as long as necessary. And that we do make decisions because we've got practical work, but that doesn't mean that you have to drop your differences. We have to actually have the ability to continue to debate differences. So that's why we use the term accept, isn't it? A program has to be accepted by the membership. One of the conditions of joining CPGB, or what we propose, a condition for joining a future communist party, when some more substantial organisations come together and a party is formed, we'd still say you accept the program. You don't have to agree with everything in the program. So we don't use the term agree. Otherwise it would fossilise and you wouldn't have the right to change it. So what's the problem? Then if we have what Moshe I think is saying is that the fused organisation with these CPGB plus these two other groups, it surprised us that they were willing to talk about fusion. But okay, if they want to talk about fusion, that's what we're doing. And we debate it all the way to the end as far as it goes. Who knows what it will turn up. You don't have to be optimistic, over optimistic about the outcome, because it may not happen at the moment. Much rather, if we were talking fusion with the bigger revolutionary groups, if it was the SWP and ex-militant or RCP, if those rather larger groups, or not very big, are they, but larger groups, if they were coming up for talks on fusion, that'd be much better. But there is a difference between the fused organisation, even if these TAS and the part of Prometheus, if they join with CPGB through a fusion congress, then okay, it will still probably not be a communist party. It will still be a CPGB campaign for a communist party. In that sense, you could argue that it's the same thing. I think that's what Moshe is saying. It's not going to be any different, because after the Fusion Congress, you'll still have a small organisation made up of people with different opinions who accept a programme and still debate their differences. Okay, what's the difference? Well, of course, there is a difference, because something's happened. So as an example, the process we're doing now, whether it succeeds or whether it doesn't in actually producing a refused organisation, is an example of how to handle that process. That's what it is. It's a good example of how we should deal with comrades who are willing to consider fusion. And I know some comrades showed in the first weeks of this fusion thing, some people appeared to think, for example, will Nick Rack be put onto the provisional central committee, things like that, But of course we don't do it that way, do we? Central committee can be removed. Every aggregate that we have now, there's a democracy in our organisation that you won't find anywhere else. And we have an aggregate every few weeks, and that actually can change the composition of the Provisional Central Committee. It can sack it or elect a new one. It can change everything. It's a Congress in effect. And I would, there's no leader going to be put on to the top committee that we can't remove. That would be ridiculous. We've got a long history of not allowing that. We're not going to change that. It can't be done by agreement. It got to be done by a Congress where you go in, everybody who takes part in a fusion Congress agrees to accept the result. They don't agree with the result. They agree to accept the result. Okay, otherwise it's not a fusion Congress, is it? So why don't you join Moshe? Why don't you join CPGB? I don't understand why you're not in. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I don't have anybody else indicating from the floor, so I propose to hand it back to you, Jack. And if you want to take this as your concluding remarks, I think that would probably be okay.
Got my potatoes waiting for me.
Oh, sure. Every Sunday. I don't know. You're almost Irish, aren't you? Kind of
I'm a revolutionary who likes to stick to the same thing.
You do.
Okay, thanks, comrades. I mean, I agree with Anne's opening remarks. I mean, I live in hopes that the talks that the comrades have in TAS are productive. And my own hope is, okay, maybe against evidence, but my own hope is that having tried to produce a draft, there's a realization this isn't that easy. Now, I know that there's a famous story, Moshe's already quoted it. There's Charlie Marx down the road in Primrose Hill, and he dictates the entire preamble, the maximum section of the program, almost without pausing for breath. So, okay, he could do that. But I do just point out that the minimum section took a year. This was something that was carried out in the French press. Engels collaborated with. So this wasn't just something that was concocted, in Primrose Hill. It came, from the movement itself. So, okay, but there's also, again, I think Jim Nelson talked about, okay, is this going to be open to amendment by the TAS comrades? Is it going to be open to debate? Well, to make it meaningful, it has to be. In the same way, if we produced anything that was new, it has to be open to the membership to say, we don't like this, we like that, we want this in it, and all the rest of it. So we wait and see. But I agree with what your sort of basic thrust is, Anne. I think, that if I was the comrades, okay, I'm not, I would be talking about amending the CPGB program. You could shape, I mean, in terms of word count, one could get rid of the draft rules of a Communist Party in terms of a word count. I mean, sure. You can get rid of the introduction, sure. But okay, Raphael, you ask what we're not talking about walking. We have never said it. We've said the exact opposite. So what we've said is, look, if the comrades came along and we were defeated, for example, on, I don't know, the section on the transition period, okay, we would live with it. We would then form a faction, because that would be an important, not just principle, it would be a whole absolutely essential strategic question from our point of view. And I've already described the situation, imagining, okay, it's hard to do, but on TAS's maximalist program, the party comes to power, forms a government, okay, and then proceeds to abolish money and hold up Britain as the shining example. And we, as a minority faction, metaphorically hold our heads in our hand and protest that this isn't the right way of going about it. This is the road to disaster. We would be doing that publicly, and we would be doing that publicly from the day that that was agreed. So we would be a minority faction until we changed opinion. Hopefully that won't happen, but that's what we're talking about, Raphael. So I'm not going to pick out what would we be prepared to I don't know, be defeated on. We'd be prepared to be defeated on anything, right? That's what we're saying. But we would reserve the right to carry on as a faction. That's all we're saying. Okay, in terms of I don't know, the example I would give as something that Lenin and Plekhanov and Trotsky and Martov, from what I can gather from reading the minutes of the Second Congress, could live with, but they didn't like it. And that was the concession, I think, to the Bund. I could be wrong. Might have been to Georgians. I don't know, because, you know, I wasn't at the Congress. I can only read the minutes. But this is on the language question. The comrades went into the Congress with a very brief, you know, equality of all languages, something along those lines. And the Congress voted for a very long amendment. And the comrades said, well, we agree with it, but it really is not necessary. This is a political concession that we don't need to give. Okay, they could live with it, and they did live with it. Lenin could live with the rule change. He didn't say, I'm going to walk when Martov won on the rules. He said, okay, I don't like it, but I can live with it. And so that's our attitude. So we're really expecting it from the other side as well. So, you know, we might have things that are passed that we don't like, that we strongly dislike, but we're not talking about walking. What we're talking about isn't something, I mean, in our view, isn't going to have, you know, this is not going to be a communist party, a fusion between us and two small groups. We are not the party. The first point in our paper, the Weekly Worker, it says that we have the name of the party, but there is no communist party. There's no communist party today in Britain, as far as I'm concerned, or in the world. And you fuse together TASS and the CPGB and the pro-talks with, and you're still going to have a tiny, tiny, tiny group. The sort of party we're talking about is part of the working class. It's a significant portion of the working class. You could even describe it as the organization of the working class into a party. Now, that's not everybody in the working class, but it is, as Mike said, hundreds of thousands. That's what we're talking about. That's a party. Now, you can have a party that's been forced underground, that's only operating with a few thousand activists, but it's the rootedness in the working class that's key to us, that says this is why it's legitimate to call yourself a party. Everything else is an aspiration. So I would take the first two congresses of the RSDLP not to be the foundation of a real party, but the intention of forming a party. And that's what we're talking about. So we're talking about CPGB. This is our intention. This is where we want to go. And that's what we're trying to bring TASS and Prometheus on board. We want a party. This has got to be a mass party. And as Ant will say, and we've got no disagreement there, it has to be a party that can coordinate internationally, has to be part of, if we can possibly achieve it, a world party. After all, you know, we're talking about a world economy, we're talking about a world proletariat, and we're talking about a world capitalist system, right? So that's our aspiration. Okay. I don't know whether the comrades grasp what we mean by extreme democracy. To me, it's quite simple. Just read our draft program. It's preparing the working class to be the ruling class. And the realization of extreme democracy, to use a phrase, would be the dictatorship of the proletariat, the rule of the working class, the rule of the majority. The question is, what's important about it is precisely the struggle for it. We don't just wait for Soviets to be formed, and then we have a breakdown of capitalism. What we're talking about is a period of where the working class organizes itself precisely, not just around economics, but around high politics, international politics, the politics of democracy, how we are ruled, and how we replace how we are ruled with how we rule. That's, from our point of view, what extreme democracy is all about. Just a final point, Anne. Stan sort of reminded me of it, and that is, our organization, because I was reading, in terms of preparation for this talk, I was reading various contributions by task comrades and others, and amongst the contributions I read was one of our resident Stalinist in our letters column, Andrew Northall. And he said, don't join with the weekly worker group with Jack Conrad, all with inverted commas and all of that sort of type stuff. Join the CPB. I don't agree with everything in the British Road to Socialism, but I can change it. And he then described precisely how you go about changing it. First of all, you've got to win your branch. And I just thought to myself, precisely. So first of all, you've got to win. I don't know where he lives. I'm just going to make this one up. Bedford, right? So first of all, you've got to win the Bedford branch, but you're not allowed to get together with comrades in Northampton or London or Glasgow or Belfast in order to have a discussion. That's against the rules of the CPB. Well, in our organization, you don't have to win a branch. You can form a faction. You could put forward an amendment. You can do that publicly. And that is something you can't do in the CPB. You can't form a faction, and you're not meant to disagree publicly. So Andrew Northall, even though he's a Stalin worshipper, he's actually breaking the regulations, because General Secretary put out regulations saying, don't praise Stalin. So he's breaking the rules. But the point I'm making is, from our point of view, an individual is able to freely express themselves. Factions are freely able to express themselves. That doesn't mean anything goes. And that needs to be emphasized. So, Anne, you've illustrated my point, okay, in an extreme way, and said that some twat was posting racist comments. Well, okay, I don't. But you kicked them off. Well, we would do that in terms of party membership. So, for example, I'll only give this one. We had in our communist platform, which isn't the same as the CPGB, Moshe was a member of it, but so was a comrade called Ian Donovan, and his explanation of world politics was counting Jews. So how many Jewish billionaires are there? And that was his explanation. We kicked him out, and we publicly said we kicked him out, and we publicly said this is how we went about it. And that's what we would repeat. So, of course, every party, has its boundaries, and those boundaries aren't fixed. They're decided, by the struggle, by argument. Who's going through some mental problems at the moment? We wouldn't kick someone out on that basis. You make your choice. All we're saying is that the left needs to take party seriously, and the left doesn't take party seriously. What we've got is a series of confessional sects where you have to agree, or what you've got is a series of hopeless broad front projects that unite with the labor bureaucracy or the trade union bureaucracy, where the left is obliged to not criticize, right? Not openly criticize, SWP and all of its we demand change and all of that sort of nonsense. Anyway, I'm going to finish there. Thank you to comrades for your contributions, and I'm going to do my best over the next couple of days to write this up as a contribution to the Forging Communist Unity process for this coming weekly worker. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, comrades. Are there any announcements, or is it just
No.
simply?
No.
Okay. Next week, Online Communist Forum. See you there. Thanks. Bye.